Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here. I remind you that the reason why I do this show is because I believe that we live in the most beautiful, beautiful place. And we have many shared accomplishments, and often we can forget that, especially in times like this, which are very, very challenging. People would say that there's a cloud which is hanging over us. I think that if we look around, and I often say I just look out my window, I can see magnificent creations, things that have been made by men and women that help us enormously through our day-to-day functioning. If you take a look at how we live today versus how most people in England, in the UK, lived 100 years ago, it is so dramatically different. If our socks have a hole in it, well, not too many people darn them anymore. We'll go out to Costco, which is down the street, or Walmart, and we'll buy a pair. We'll buy 10 pairs, and there it is. And once those are done, we'll just toss them out. Well, some people might argue, well, you know what? I miss the old times. I hear that, and I think there's a combination of beauty from those days which have passed us and those days which are here today. And I am here to remind you of that, and I do that through inspirational interviews. Today, I'm very, very excited to have a celebrity, as he calls himself, in Southern Ontario.
Do I?
Michael Corin. Yeah, I was listening to an interview that you did. You said, well, like I'm a celebrity in
I don't.
Southern Ontario.
No, you got that one wrong. No, what I said was, I was trying to. Somebody was being nice to me, and I said, "Yeah, no, I didn't say celebrity. I said I'm slightly well known in parts of Southern Ontario." And that'll be on my gravestone. He was slightly well known in parts of Southern Ontario. Not a lot to boast about.
Maybe there'll be a little map there as well. So welcome to today's show. We'll dive into the intersection of faith, cultures, and politics with a thought-provoking voice, and that is my guest today, Michael Corin, as I said, who's an acclaimed journalist and author and a commentator, whose incisive writing and bold perspectives has sparked conversation across this globe of ours. From his books like The Rebel Christ and Hatred, Islam's War on Christianity, to his columns tackling everything from social justice to religious freedom, Michael brings a unique blend of conviction, wit, and clarity to the table. Today, we'll explore his journey, his take on today's polarized world, and what it means to engage with faith and reason in the modern age. Michael is a husband, he's a father of four, and he is what we call a Zadie, or a grandfather. So once again, welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, we have one grandchild and one on the way.
How are you as a granddad?
My wife is a better nana than I am a grandpa. I'm very good. I'm very loving, tactile, but I don't think I have the staying power. And I was like that as a father. I think I was a good dad, but I don't. The longer, less interesting and immediate moments, I don't think I had that sort of stamina. But I was good. I became a better father as we went along. I think our oldest, our son, poor guy, I think I was the least good with him. And you learn things. But I think generally I was a good dad, not far from perfect. But it made me reflect more and more on my own family, my own parents. And I think I made some of the mistakes my dad did, but I think I did a lot better. But then my dad had a lot more pressure and a lot more challenge in his life. I'm really rather privileged. But my wife is a wonderful mum. So the balance, I don't want to be too hard on myself. I find it easy to be generous and giving. But in terms of time, as I say, the fun moments, I'm there in abundance. But the other times, I think I could have done better.
You talked about your father extensively, actually, in other interviews that I watched for research for the show. He was a taxi driver, which I find quite exciting,
Really?
actually. Well, no, because I'll tell you why, Michael. They're so eclectic in nature. You get into a taxi, and if you decide to dive into a conversation with the driver, or today an Uber, they have what to talk about, and they're actually very back and forth. There's a great tete-a-tete that you can establish with taxi drivers.
Yeah.
What you said about your father, he was a very nice man. He was a tough guy. He was a boxer. And there was a lot of love in the house.
Yeah, I mean, your point about cabs and taxis. I mean, things in England, where I grew up in London, the cabs were iconic, and they're dying in some ways. I mean, they're still there, but things have changed a great deal. I mean, people get Ubers; they're much cheaper. And today, I mean, in Toronto, you get into a cab. Cabs, there's very rarely any conversation. There can be a linguistic barrier too. Ubers are better. I think with Uber, yeah, you can get into a conversation. But those black cabs in London, I mean, when my dad trained to be a cab driver, he had to learn what's called the knowledge. He had to know all the streets of London, and they're not logical. It's not like New York or anything. And it was a job, though, that if you worked hard and worked the hours, you could earn fairly decent money. I mean, the guys I went to school with, whose dads were working on the production line or whatever, we earned more money than they did. Now, my dad worked much longer hours. He didn't take holidays very often, and but yeah, he was a good man. He wasn't perfect. I think he had quite a rough upbringing. And there were issues that I think he probably dealt with or didn't deal with. But he never raised his hands to me, never hit me. He had a temper, but he tended to shout. And that could be a problem growing up. But, you know, people didn't get divorced. Working class people didn't get divorced back then. My parents stayed together. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but they did everything they could for me and for my sister. And very selfless in that way. And I had a very nice upbringing, really.
What was your mom like?
Her name was Sheila. She was very much a Cockney. She was from Whitechapel, then Stepney Green. And I had my family tree traced on my mum's side, because my mum's mum, her name was Bertha Jones. She was a blonde, blue-eyed Cockney. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather, his name was Dave Schneider. And he was an orphan. He was adopted when he was a little boy. And they lived 2 doors away in the East End of London. And when the family tree was being done, the genealogist said to me, I should let you know that your uncle was born 5 months after your grandparents got married. And I said, I couldn't give it. But quite obviously, they were at it. Very good looking couple, Dave and Bertha. And I suppose Bertha said, "Oi, Dave, I'm pregnant. You better get married then." And it's interesting because, you know, she was Church of England. He was Jewish. And but the East End of London was quite like that. There was it was poor, and it always been the home of immigrants, and people lived together. And
yes.
It's it was. I mean, that's all gone now. It's very different there now. But my mum, she was a hairdresser, and then she was at home. I think my dad, both of them wanted that. It was a sign of pride. You could just about do it back then. You can't do it now. I couldn't afford a house. And the first place I remember, was I born there? Was in a little apartment in Leytonstone, and no central heating. And then I don't think. And then we moved to Ilford, and my dad bought a semi-detached house. Very proud of that. And she was lovely. She was very loving, very caring. Both my parents were very bright, but you didn't go to university from that background. My father was in the RAF when he was 17. And my mum, she was highly literate, very well read, but there's no way. It just nobody went to university from that background. Although she grew up, it's very interesting the people both my mum and dad grew up with. My dad went to Hackney Jewish Youth Club with Harold Pinter. And I've always found it interesting that Harold Pinter in later life spoke like this. Of course, he won the Nobel Prize, I think, and he was a marvelous man with letters. And my father still spoke as he was a cab driver from Hackney. So obviously one of them had worked quite hard to change the way they sounded. Must have been my dad. And my mum, that was Arnold Wesker, the playwright, and someone else my dad sort of knew. I don't know if this means much in Canada, but Ron and Reg Cray, the Cray twins, they were local boys as well. And, not that my dad was involved in any of that, but they ran the underworld, certainly in East London. if you want to know what they're like, there's a movie called Legend, I think, with Tom Hardy. He plays both of them, and yeah, it was a pretty rough and ready. But I was soft. I mean, I grew up in a suburb, really, not a posh suburb, but
yeah, I was going to ask you. Your father was a boxer.
Well, no, he was
and you tell a story.
He was an amateur boxer. I mean, everybody boxed back then.
An amateur boxer.
Yeah, in Hackney, in Tottenham, that era. I mean, everybody did. My uncle did it. My uncle was a very good footballer, soccer player. He played for Tottenham reserves, and he was offered a contract by Norwich City, I remember, before my time. But everybody boxed, and then that's just what they did, really. I think my dad quite liked it. I don't think my uncle did.
Did he have a broken nose like that?
No, you got to get hit in the face. I mean, not all boxers have broken noses, and when you're amateur, you have a face guard as well. But yeah, it was very common. I mean, actually, in Britain and in the US, until the probably up to the 30s, late 30s, a lot of the champions were Jewish.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
Ted Kid Lewis was, I think, welterweight champion of the world. That was Ted Kid Lewis. It was a very long Russian Jewish name that he had, but my dad knew him. There were quite a few. But of course, with wealth, not wealth, with embourgeoisement, that sort of thing goes. You see it in the US as well. I mean, there are far fewer Italian fighters now than there used to be.
Correct. Yes. You tell an interesting story in one of your books about how you went over to a friend's place and the father started railing on you, are you Jewish? And he kicked you out of the house. What I found most interesting about that story was that you didn't tell your father because you said your father would go over and he would deal with it.
Well, what happened there, he wasn't actually a friend. It was a very innocent age, and we go over to what we called the recreation ground. We'd all have our little push bikes, and you just play football. You play soccer. You put your coats down or whatever for the goalpost, and you play football. And it was all very egalitarian and nice. And this kid I'd never met before, and he said, do you want some orange drink? So I went back to his house, and we were just chatting away. And kids, I don't know how old I was, 7, 8, I don't know, completely innocent. And his father came home, obviously angry, and he didn't say anything to me, but I heard him saying something to this other boy. And I didn't tell my dad, but I didn't really know what was going on. Only later, I realized what he was saying. He was saying, is he an effing Jew? Get him out here. And I should have said, well, no, only 3/4. Can I leave, stay for lunch? But yeah, I didn't tell my dad. But partly because of the reaction, but also I wasn't even sure. It just didn't really register because I faced very little anti-Semitism even later on, and certainly at that age, I never had. But it was, that was very strange, very odd experience for me.
When I was a kid, I was walking home with a buddy of mine, Helmut, I won't say his last name, and we had just bought hamsters. And he turned to me, and we were also, I assume, 8 years old. Mind you, many of my memories go back to a time when I think I was 8. And he turned to me, right? And he turned to me and he said, Hitler didn't finish his job. And I looked at him and I had no idea what he was talking about. And the next day he came back to me and he apologized. And I couldn't figure that whole thing out.
So I assume he was German by the name.
He was German,
and out of the blue, he just said this to you?
Just out of the blue, Michael.
And he knew you were Jewish.
Very strange. He knew I was Jewish, and there would never been any contention between us before. So it was very strange, but it was very difficult as a young man, as a very small person, and because I'd never been exposed to that before, and that was sort of the beginnings of
were his parents born in Canada?
No, they were born in Germany.
This is very interesting. You say
this.
They
were lovely people, actually.
Were they? Because there was a boy at our school. I won't say his name, but I've been in contact with him since then. And his mother was German. Like his father was a British soldier who met her during the war. And one day he was having an argument with someone at the high school, which was probably about 10, 15% Jewish maybe, but just really everyone got along. But he's having this argument with a kid I assume was Jewish, and he said, "You effing Jew." And it was another fellow, I'll just give his first name, Raymond, who was always much bigger. He sort of reached puberty long before any of us did. And he just went over to this guy and just smacked him, bang, and he just unconscious. I almost felt sorry for him. And I spoke to him later on, years later on, and he said, I found it very hard to forgive my mother because she would say things and I didn't know what they were. And I would echo them at school. And I hate all, he totally rejected all of that, but she would say things like that apparently. And it's normally you hear it from a parent, but I wonder if his parents were very nice. I wonder where he heard that from.
This is what I couldn't figure out. But I was curious about your life is that you grew up in a home which was eclectic, I guess you would say. Your father was Jewish. Your mother was...
That's okay. That'd be great. I'd love that. But no, my mom was, her name was Jones. Her mum's name was Jones. No, my mum's mum was, English, Cockney, blonde, blue-eyed, very English. I'd got their family tree took it back hundreds of years. Her father was a Jewish guy from the East End. So my mum, but it was the Englishness, I think, was a dominant aspect to me growing up. I didn't really get on with I didn't like very much my father's parents. We used to go there sometimes after football. We'd go and see Tottenham play, my dad and I, when I was a kid, and then we'd go to their place in Hackney, and it seemed very foreign to me, and very, and they were quite, my grandfather in particular was quite, you'll do what you're told type of thing, and I didn't really get on with them. But no, my mother was very English, very.
Right. And what I was wondering about, was there anything, in fact, Jewish about your home?
Oh, yeah. Because, I just mentioned Tottenham, which you probably wouldn't follow, but Tottenham is meant to be the Jewish team in England. It's not, I've written about this at length. It's a very long sociology. And the vast majority of Tottenham fans are not Jewish. But because of the area that it is in, it got this reputation. And there was quite a bit of antisemitism from the far right, which was very small in the 70s. But they adopted football hooliganism. So Chelsea, another team in particular, I always find it funny when, like in North America, a Jewish man will say to me, and his son is a Chelsea fan. And I think, wow, in the 70s, do you know what that would have meant? But again, the minorities involved. But yeah, our home, we had a mezuzah on the door. My dad did not work on Yom Kippur, but that was partly because a lot of cab drivers, probably up to 30%, were Jewish. And if a non-Jewish driver saw a Jewish driver working, completely out of affection, he'd say, I saw Phil Corin driving the cab yesterday on Yom Kippur. This is real sort of Corin. I saw Phil Corin driving the cab on Yom Kippur. Because they understood what was going on, the culture, And it's not only that, but my dad, I don't think there was any religiosity. He just thought so Yom Kippur, he didn't drive, didn't go out to work, but didn't go to synagogue. But there was that. There was a consciousness of, I was aware of anti-Semitism, really a victim of it, but I was aware of what it was. There was a cultural Jewishness. Whenever we drove back from, so my dad taught me to see Tottenham play between the ages of 5 and 12, then I started going on my own. But those years, when we drove back from Tottenham, you go through Stamford Hill, which is a very Orthodox Jewish Hasidic area. And my dad did not like it at all. As a secular, I think he felt embarrassed.
I see.
Because to him, his Jewishness was sport and tough, self-reliant, and British. These were essentially, quintessentially English people. And he just didn't like it. I remember he used to call them cowboys. And
Cowboys.
Yeah.
It was interesting is you came to Canada to do a speech at University of Toronto, and you said this very beautiful woman came up to you later. In one interview, you said you're not sure she may have been drunk.
I'm sure she wasn't. She can probably hear me. I'm just being humble. But yeah, that's the only reason I'm here. I met
because of love.
Yeah, I was punching above my weight, that's for sure. And
I often feel that way.
Was September of '86, and we got married in July of '87.
But your dad didn't come, right? Your dad didn't come to the wedding.
No, my mum came and my auntie Ethel came, her auntie, on my grandma's side, and my best man, Steve. But yeah, there's a variety of reasons. I mean, and I see a bit of that in me as well. I mean, this idea of traveling. He came later though. After we were married, he came over here with my mum. After he'd had a stroke, and he came here and we drove him around because he lived in Toronto for a while.
Oh.
When he came out of the RAF, he was in New York and he came to Toronto. I think a lot of young guys, they just thought they couldn't settle, after all that had gone on. It's very hard to come out of that environment and then get a job behind a desk or whatever. But yeah, that was. I've never. I mean, I have some ideas of why he didn't come, and I think he would have been He got married in a Catholic church. I think he would have been very, very quite uncomfortable there.
But you forgave him, and he forgave you.
Oh, well, there's nothing for him to forgive, really. I mean, he didn't expect me to marry a Jewish girl. That was never expected. Just a nice, ordinary English girl. I think there was someone they had in mind who was just a friend. Tracy she's lovely. Haven't seen her in years. But yeah, I forgave him. I mean, forgiveness is essential. It's fundamental to any sort of human dignity and well-being.
What was very curious was I believe it was in 1986. You went through a baptism. You accepted Catholicism, Jesus into your heart.
It was before then. It was in 84, I think. It was in England, around then, I think. Yeah, but it started before then. I mean, I've been interested in Christianity at high school and then at university, and nothing ever stuck. And then when I moved, I left my parents' house. I bought a little apartment in right in the centre of London, which, oh my golly, I sold it for, what was it? About
regrets.
60,000. Oh golly, I mean, I could rent it out for what anyway. And there was a beautiful church quite close by, and I went along and I received instruction for quite a few months, and yeah, I was baptized and confirmed at the same time. Lovely.
You said church. You said a beautiful thing about your baptism. The night of your baptism, I shook like a child, like a afraid child. I was in my early 20s, a grown man, but I felt so young and vulnerable. But my question is, why not Judaism? Well,
I mean, I suppose I wasn't. I mean, I had some Hebrew education. There was a synagogue in Newbury Park, a Reform synagogue. Most people in Britain, I assume even now, it may have changed, but it was called United. It was like Orthodox, modern Orthodox, I suppose you'd say. And Reform and Liberal were very small. And a lot of them, I don't want to generalize unfairly, but I think intermarriage was a big part of it. The people who were married, non-Jewish people, often would go to, if they went to a synagogue, it would be a Reform synagogue. But that's not all. It also has its German origin, and but you understand far more than I do about it. But it never really held any attraction. I mean, I've got to be candid with you. I didn't see anything enormously positive from a religious point of view with Judaism. I saw a cultural beauty about it, and I was very proud of those people who'd achieved great things, Jewish people. I mean, so many areas that but the religion didn't really appeal to me, and I didn't understand the attraction of it. Now, maybe I wasn't probably exposed to it, could be, but to me, the fulfillment of it was in Christianity. And I think probably when I was baptized back then, I don't know if I was even ready. Not that that's relevant, because, I mean, I baptize people. What is ready? If you want to, then you must be baptized. But my faith and my understanding of faith has grown, transformed over the years. But it is a good question. Why not? Perhaps because it was the religion that I knew a bit about. Maybe that's why I rejected it. I mean, Christianity was part of growing up because it was a very English home. So, we had the religious movies at Christmas and Easter, and people came to the door singing Christmas carols, and we gave them money. And when I went to primary school, which was 5 to 11, we had a Christian assembly. That'd probably be illegal today. But in this non-religious school, we had Christian hymns and the Bible and it was lovely. I thought it was great, and it was just I thought I found answers there that I didn't find anywhere else.
What sort of answers?
To life's meaning, and where is joy to be found? I don't mean pleasure, I mean joy. Mm-hmm. I found C.S. Lewis was extremely important to me in that area, who of course was married to a Jewish woman who became a Christian, Joy Gresham, Joy Davidman. The big things, the permanent things, the things that really mattered. I mean, religion, not just Christianity, provides answers there, or it should do. But to me, it was the Christian God and the Jewish God, of course. But God incarnate in Christ. That's where I found truth, and love, and maybe safety, and purpose.
Yeah, I find it really compelling that you didn't find that meaning in Judaism. Mostly, I'm sure, because I'm biased. But you're quite the intellectual. You're the thinking man, and Judaism is all about learning and studying Torah for everybody. For the masses. You can walk into any shul, into any synagogue, and you'll find a number of Talmidei Chachamim, scholars there, who are ensconced in the whole question of, well, if there's cotton, if there's this in my suit, how do I separate it and how do I do it properly? And there's all these, discussions around the nuances of the Torah. So that's more or less my question is, I would have suspect that you would have found great meaning within Judaism, but that wasn't the case. Now,
I think I would.
The thing that really... Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Well, no, you're right. And I mean, I'm to blame here because I didn't give Judaism any opportunity. What I've seen growing up was the Jewish culture of my father's family. My grandpa, he was an orphan, didn't have any family. So there were 3 Jewish grandparents, and the Jewish one on my mum's side didn't have any family at all. He wasn't religious, but he was 4 years in the British Army. And which I wish, I did ask him things. He very rarely said very much, but this guy from Whitechapel, a Jewish guy from Whitechapel, goes in the army, and Lance Corporal, Sergeant, Quartermaster Sergeant offered a commission, which he refused. He never spoke about any issues that he faced. But on my father's side, it didn't attract me. And I don't think I was ever really told about Judaism. I did a couple of years of Hebrew classes. They were okay, but again, it was resentment. Why did I have to go to school on a Sunday, for goodness sake? But I'm sure. I think Judaism. You would have explored this, I know, widely and deeply, because the culture is so rich, and because of the racial side of it as well. The religion sometimes, I think people, I think if you ask most people, Judaism, they have no idea what it is. They believe in God, but they wouldn't really know. And a lot of Jewish people I know would have very little idea either. That's
very true.
It's a shame, really, but it's, I've known people who've, Steve Pakin, who I'm sure you know,
yes.
Steve, his son Zach, who's a friend, he embraced quite Orthodox Judaism. I think less so now, perhaps, than it was, but really takes it very seriously. I admire that greatly.
I'm very curious, and I ask Christian friends this many times. I do conversion classes, and I'm always deeply enamored and have great respect for those individuals who decide in life to take on spirituality, because it's an arduous thing if you take it seriously. You said in one of your interviews, you were baptized and then you kind of let it go because you didn't work on it, and you compared it to a relationship. If you're going to be married, you got to work on your marriage, and I thought that was very, very true. But can you explain to me and to my viewers, what does it mean to take Jesus into your heart?
It's not a phrase I use. I find it a bit banal. And there's an evangelical approach that talks about the heart quite a lot. Is in my heart, is in my heart. And good, fine. But no, I would emphasize relationship. And Christianity does do that when it's followed properly. a relationship with the living God. And so you should live your life according to what you know to be the truth. And that can be very difficult to forgive and to understand and to not lie and to not trim corners, because you're not meant to do that. And to empathize. I mean, empathy is a great spiritual quality. And I'm a priest, and I deal a lot with people in great pain and people who often are suffering, and people have a lot of challenges in life. And I'll be absolutely candid. Sometimes that can be challenging. It's not like the movies. It's not that you spend time with someone and their life is changed and they hug you and it's all wonderful. It's not like that. People can spit in your face, and insult you and abuse you. And but you have to see God in that person. That God created us in His image, and that spark of God is in every person, even if sometimes they're very hard to like, as I'm sure I can be as well.
My father was a rabbi.
All right.
So, yes, he was a rabbi in Kitchener for 36 years until he died in 1989 and 61. He was very young.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So yes, thank you. I grew up in that milieu, and I would often see my father open the door for a congregant, and they would go downstairs. My father made sure, Michael, that he was never alone in the house with a woman. Never. It's sort of a value amongst Orthodox Jews. It's called yichud, which means you're never alone with a woman. And sometimes he would really can't tell you about our discussion, but you could see in his face that it had been very intense, and that indeed he was dealing with something which was very empathetic man, even though he and I did not have a good relationship. But I wonder, what is it within you that you saw within yourself that allowed you to be ordained, and then to do counseling and have that belief in your character that you could help others?
That's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't say I counsel, I listen. And if ever I think that someone needs a professional, I will refer them. But we're often the first point of contact. So people come in to church and they want to speak, and they want to explain about their life. And there are times when it doesn't really make any sense, but you just listen. I mean, I've learned in my years of ordination that shut up, just listen to people. Often they're very lonely. They want someone to listen to them. I don't think I could live alone. And there are people out there who do not speak to other people. Horrible way to live. So you try to be there for that. You try to be understanding. I mean, there are things that I've been told that are quite difficult to come to terms with, but you have to listen. I mean, I never thought I'd be ordained. If you would have said to me years ago, you'll be a priest, I'm talking about never. And so it's a bit of a surprise. And it's been a few years now, and you get used to things, I suppose, but you're always growing in it. And I mean, it's such a privilege to be at that altar and to just stand there. And I don't really look directly at the people in the congregation, but to think I'm consecrating for them and what is happening right now, and it's an extraordinary thing. And then to preach and it's. I mean, I don't think I have any particular ability. I mean, I think I preach relatively well. I'm used to speaking in public, and I can make people laugh a bit, but I'm not a theologian. I'm not deep. And there are many people who are far better at listening and counseling than I am. But you just do what you can. And you do. I should think a lot of what I do doesn't have any effect on anybody. But every now and again, you'll hear something that you've had an effect. You have had it, something positive has been achieved. And sometimes it can be very surprising. And I'm not going to sit here and say, but that's not why I do it. Well, come on, I'm a person, I'm a human. When I hear that, it's lovely when people say, oh, I was so moved by your message, or that meeting we had, it really helped me. Yeah, of course I feel good. I'm not going to, oh no, please, I don't want to hear that rubbish. And that helps. We're creatures. We have feelings, and we can be hurt, and we can be overjoyed, and we can be, really feel inflated. We've got to be careful about that, but it all has to be given to God. And anything I do have, I thank God for. And that can be hard too. And, there can be people you work with you're not particularly fond of as well. And they probably think the same about you. But you have to have a place to go: prayer, belief, scripture.
You went back to school at 50 years old. You went to Trinity College. You were there for 3 years, which you kind of did it quicker perhaps than other people. But you said that it was really tough at times and you weren't sure whether you'd be able to complete it. What was so tough about it?
Actually, I was older than 50. I must have been about 50, mid to late 50s, I think. The academic side was okay. You could go as deep as you wanted into it, or you could just get through. And the history, that's my training, so that wasn't an issue. Struggled with philosophy and theology. Quite a few people do it in 3 years, but a lot of people take longer because you had to get 30 credits. And I think, it wasn't just academic. You also had to get credits in pastoral work. So you had to intern at certain churches, and then you had to work in a hospital or a prison or things like that. And but for me, there was always the chance that at the end of it, I was pretty sure I'd get my Master's of Divinity. I thought I'd get that wasn't the issue. The issue was, would I be ordained? Would they say, thank you, but I don't know, you're too controversial, or you're this or you're that, and we're not ordaining you. And then I haven't wasted 3 years, but in a way I have. So that concerned me. And there were some people I came across who didn't inspire me, let's put it that way. Others who did. It was different from what I expected it to be. But I am so pleased that I persevered. My golly, I don't know what my life would be like if I hadn't.
You talked about the last 10 years being, if you will, the best years of your life. You said you were always a little bit lost. I think you have your best man, Steve, you said, was always a fellow who seemed to be very grounded and rooted, right? Correct? He always kind of knew where he was at. He was content. Yes.
Yeah. This contentment is something I so admire and envy, really.
Yeah.
Steve's an example of someone who's always had it. And I've only come close to it in the past 10 or 12 years.
Would you say you're mostly content now?
I think so. I have no ambitions. I don't get too upset about things. I see joy in life. But then, you have a health issue, or you just don't feel too good about something. And there's always some sort of reason for not feeling great. But when I look back at, I did a show recently, The Agenda on TVO, which you wouldn't get in Quebec, I suppose, and it was with someone I used to be on with, Eshad Manji. And years ago, about 30 years ago, we were on this thing called Friendly Fire, where each week we'd stand there, each side of a little desk, and just shout at each other, really. And we went on together, we're friends now, talking about how much we'd changed. And I can't really understand me back then. There was me there, but it wasn't me. But it was me. You try and you work on those things that are positive, and you try and deal with those things that are negative. We're all works in progress, works in process. And I do believe in this idea of revolution, that you're constantly a permanent revolution. Things are changing. The way I feel now, and I think I had this sort of conversion about 12 years ago, politically and theologically. But some of that I haven't gone back on it, but I think I'm more balanced now. There are some people in the wider church, and some of their beliefs, people around Trump, and they hurt me. I mean, I can't understand how they can feel like they call themselves Christians and they say and do certain things. That can be difficult, but you have to try to understand, and certainly understand that the people behind them are probably not quite like that. I mentioned empathy earlier. It is so important. There was an essay, can't remember who wrote it. She was a woman journalist who moved from New York to, I think, upstate, a rural area. And she wrote an essay about how amazed she was that most of the people around her voted Trump. And they were such lovely people. And when the snows came in, the people outside, without any request, the people digging her out of the snow were these Trump supporters. And I see people, I'm a huge opponent of Donald Trump, but the notion that everyone who voted for him is this terrible human being, And I suppose the balance of that is that every Democrat is an angel. I'm afraid that's not true. And look at the Israel-Palestine things that are going on. I mean, I can fully understand a Palestinian being very angry, but you have people who are screaming as though Israel represents everything bad in the world, and they have no understanding of its history, and worse than that, they have no understanding of why it's there in the first place. And I want to speak to some of these people and say, what was your great-grandfather doing? Do you know how many countries expelled Jews over the centuries? This just going through why and anyway, it's I've come to really dislike. I always did dislike political extremism, but more and more because I think it's come into the mainstream. People don't think it's extreme, but there's an extreme of right and left that has come into mainstream politics now, more and more. I think the Conservative Party in this country, look at some of the MPs who were elected, there's some pretty hardline people there. They would never have been in a Conservative caucus years ago. So that does worry me, yeah.
Talking about extremism, there was an article that I read lately, and this fellow Saeed conjectured that there's 1.5 billion people in the world. I'm not sure how he came up with that number, that hate Jewish people, that are anti-Semites. And whether that number is true or not, let's just say there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world. Why are the Jews hated so much, Michael?
Oh, golly. Brilliant people have tried to deal with that one. Well, I don't know who that was who wrote that. The idea that all Muslims hate Jews is simply untrue.
Yes,
I know too many Muslims to believe that.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably on the streets in certain parts of the Muslim world, there could be an ignorance and the idea that Jews are the enemy. But I mean, in Pakistan, for example, that certainly wasn't the way in the early years of the state. Jews were revered in many ways. And I mean, I know a number of Palestinians, they're educated, I suppose, but they don't think that either. And I don't think in a lot of the world, I don't think people have views. Do people really have views about Jews in China and Japan and South Korea? Generally not. Israel-Palestine has opened up a new valve, which is not always anti-Semitism, but it's not always just wanting justice for Palestine. And I've seen it too. I mean, it's just unacceptable completely. But I reject the premise. Anti-Semitism, dislike of Jews, because it has the Christian world has a lot to answer for, and the Christian world began to change things after the Second World War. Post-Holocaust theology, things changed, but even before then, there was an idea of emphasizing the Jewishness of Jesus. I mean, how can you not? He was. So was Paul and Peter and Mark and John and possibly Luke. Anyway, I mean, they all were, and it's an inside baseball story in a way about Jewish people, which then extends to the world. When you have a minority of people who, but because of their lack of homeland, are living in countries where they're always a minority, and the European experience, well, you say to people, all you can do, will give you 2 or 3 trades that you can do, and one of them is lending money. So they lend money, and then they're hated for lending money. And in the Muslim world, it varied. Martin Gilbert, the late Martin Gilbert, lovely man, God rest his soul, he was an expert. And he said to me, I said, what's the difference between the Christian experience and the Muslim experience of Jews? And he said, well, in the Christian experience of Jews, if you compare the two, it's never been as good in the Muslim world as in the Christian world, but it's never been as bad. And what he meant was, you think of the post-war North American, European experience of Jews, maybe changing, I hope not, but possibly, but it has been a wonderful one. But that came out of the Holocaust. In the Muslim world, there was never a Holocaust. Generally far better. However, it was never as good as that absolute equality that you had in the 1950s up to now. And that was the point he was making. I mean, we've all heard the stories of Jews living in Egypt and Iraq and other countries in seems like total equality. It did change very quickly. Then, of course, you have people saying, well, Israel was behind all that. They were actually blowing up synagogues. They were doing this. They were doing that. I don't accept all of that. Even if any of that was true, the way that so many people in those countries, in those Arab countries, changed so quickly. And you think of the Hebron massacre. What was that? 29 was that?
Yes.
30.
Yes.
No, I'm sure if you say to most people at pro-Palestine marches, let's talk about the Hebron massacre, they will have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
And these were people who had lived together for, I mean, golly, there was a synagogue there, or part of a synagogue that went back to the early 16th century. It was a Sephardic family post-expulsion. But I don't know. It is interesting how both on the right and the left, anti-Semitism has been an issue. Now, the right has changed. The fascist right is very small now. And you have this mainstream, fairly hard right that sees... I remember I interviewed Helen Suzman years ago for a TV show. She was a Liberal MP in South Africa. And she said to me, she said, you know, when Jewish woman, obviously, she was a Liberal. She said, they used to say to me, why don't you go back to Israel? Go back to Israel. And then she said, and then after a few years, Israel was too good for me. So they wouldn't say it anymore. So, you know, the right has changed. The left, I have to say this, anti-Semitism has always been an issue on the left. You look back at some of the founding fathers of British socialism, for example, people I'd always admired, but you know, some of the things that were said are they're not too great. But I suppose the moderate left was seen as a liberating force. And when I grew up in Britain, the Labour Party was the party of Jewish people. Jewish people voted Labour. Ain't like that anymore, especially after Corbyn. And I think in this country too, a Liberal Party, I think, was a party of Jewish people. I think it probably still is to a large extent, but there are a number of Jewish people.
Not what it was, correct?
No, nowhere near.
How do you deal as a Christian, knowing the level of persecution that was perpetrated against the Jewish people by the Christian world? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's very difficult. I preach about it quite a bit. I emphasize the Jewishness of Jesus. I've written at length in various newspapers in this country and elsewhere about the depiction of Jesus, and it's a very difficult one to come to terms with, because you think, there was a movement in the 2nd century to completely expunge the Old Testament and anything that was Jewish, and it all started with Jesus, who was still Jewish, of course. But I try to look for the bright areas, and there are many. There are people who, and one of the great ironies, of course, is the King of Poland invited Jews into his country. And but coming from the UK, the Church of England has a pretty noble record, actually. British Christians in general, the way Jews were treated and welcomed. But we're going to elect a new pope, and there have been many wonderful popes. Pope Francis had wonderful friendships with Chief Rabbi in Argentina and with Jewish people. Pope John Paul II seemed to have a visceral understanding of the Jewish experience as a Polish man. It was quite beautiful to watch. But it was also a pope who built the ghetto, and it lasted for quite a few centuries. And I don't know. It's again, so many books written on this. It pains me terribly. Look, it still pains me when I hear, particularly at Easter, and the Jews did this and the Jews did that. Now, we're talking about, these books are written by Jews. They're talking about the Jewish authorities. They're writing as a Jew, but over the years, because pogroms often occurred at Easter, people didn't say, well, obviously this is a Jewish man writing about those Jewish people who did not accept Christ, when in fact many people did. All they hear is the Jews. And that's quite difficult, it's painful. Historical injustice, there's not much. What can I do? I was in Lincoln last year. I go to Britain every year for 3.5 weeks. And I was in Lincoln. And have you heard of Hugh of Lincoln?
I have not, no.
It was a blood libel. Areas where Jewish people lived before they were expelled from England in 1290 were not what you'd think today. Lincoln, York, Norwich, these are cities that are not the size they were. And there was a thriving community in Lincoln. And if you go there, it's very beautiful. There is the Jews' house, and there's a synagogue, and then Hugh was killed, and they blamed the Jews, and there was slaughter, and it's just horrible. Now, of course, the church has removed. There was a shrine to him and they've removed that, and they put a plaque up explaining what happened and this terrible crime. But sometimes I think, why did it take so long? There were always voices who were saying, I mean, Rasputin was a man who said, you treat the Jews so badly, then you wonder why this happens or that happens. And they've always, that's quite surprising to people, but they've always been voices of purity and justice. But by and large, it was appalling the way people were treated. And I mean, look at the Dreyfus affair. It was the Catholic Church, not all, but leading the fight against Dreyfus. And it was, so I can't fully explain. And I also get quite concerned when I hear Christians, and I mentioned this earlier, with blanket criticism of Israel. And I wrote a piece recently, actually in the Jewish Chronicle in England about this. You know, look at what Martin Luther said about Jews. So if, for example, you're a Lutheran, sure, have a point of view about Israel and Palestine, but good Lord, memorize all this, because this contributed to a culture that allowed pogroms, slaughter, expulsion, and Holocaust. I'm not saying it caused it, but it helped to build that culture. And it's a very difficult one. I mean, it's not something I dwell on. And I think in Christian circles today, I really think it's extremely rare to find anti-Semitism, certainly in the West. And I think in terms of justice for Jewish people and equality and dignity, I think the Christian church is really a force for good. But no, it hasn't always been that way. There was, I tried to find, it was called the Domus Conversus. It was where Jews in 1290, when they were expelled, those who convert, because back then it was very much religious rather than racial. I mean, yes. It changed. But well, equally in Russia, I mean, Jews who converted in Russia, and there were quite a number. There was I think general acceptance really. But those who converted were allowed to stay. They didn't have a profession anymore. So the king and various bishops provided this house for them to live in, the house of the converts. And I found it. It took quite a bit of work, actually. And it's now one of the libraries of King's College London. And I went there and I was allowed in, and you're just looking around and thinking, they've completely disappeared into British society, these people. There weren't that many, maybe 20 or 30. But incredible, really quite incredible. And Jews didn't come back into England until, well, under Elizabeth, there were communities, Sephardic mainly, and then officially under Oliver Cromwell.
Yes. Michael, according to your acceptance of Christianity, would the best case scenario be for me to be a Christian? Or is it acceptable to God that I'm a Jew?
You cheeky man. There's been quite a lot of control. Look, if you came to me and said, please tell me about Jesus, I'm interested. I really think I would certainly welcome you. But yes, just as I welcome you as a person, as a Jewish man who loves God. I mean, I'm way beyond that idea of, I mean, golly, God knows quite a bit more than I do. And God knows a sense of love and goodness and kindness and forgiveness in a person. And I've never tried. I'm always open to people, whatever their background, who come to me and want to talk about Christ. But I'm not out there trying to convert people. I hope I can maybe do that by my writing and by my speaking, but it's not a direct, I want to convert you. And of course, it's been a very, I used to host a TV show, and we'd have people from Jews for Jesus and Jews for Judaism. Julian, can't remember. But they were very interesting.
Julius says.
Yes, yeah. And I remember Bernie Farber, who's a friend of mine, and Bernie said to me, look, if Jews want to become Christians, I'm not going to say it's great, but that's up to them. He said, but for him, Jews for Jesus was something different. But I could see both sides, I suppose. And because even for me, there are times when I really think, well, there is that Jewishness in me. And I don't want to. Just the other day, someone wrote to me from the UK. There's a play on in the West End. Long story, but I'm sort of in it at the end. And she was certain that my family came from Plonsk in Poland, and I've never known that. I just knew it was somewhere in Eastern Europe. And she was talking about Jewishness, and I love to And my screensaver is the Sea of Galilee, Yam Kinneret. This is where he did his stuff. As beautiful as cathedrals are, that wasn't where he was. This is where he was. He was a man of his land and his soil and his race and his people and his religion, and I believe the Son of God too.
I'm always curious about how people change their mindset, change their opinions, and I am mostly because generally people do not.
Exactly.
You ask them, why are you Christian? Why are you a Jew? Well, because my father was, my mother was. But at some point in time, when you were a Catholic Christian, the whole issue of gays within Christianity, of gay marriages, acceptance of gay people, started to weigh on you. And when I was reading about that, I was curious about how your mindset, how your thinking started to change. Like, where did the crack, as Leonard Cohen said, where the lights start to come in? Do you remember that?
I do, actually. I mean, I used to write about this quite a lot, but it's many years ago now. But I was a pretty outspoken critic of equal marriage. I wouldn't call it equal marriage back then. I would have called it gay marriage. No, I did support civil unions, and I did support legislation guaranteeing the rights of gay people in terms of employment, housing, inheritance. So I wasn't a crazy person, but it came up quite a lot, that issue. And for me, it was a very. But there were a few people. Dermot MacCulloch, Sir Dermot MacCulloch, wonderful historian and a friend now at Oxford, and a wonderful man called Richard Coles, who was a friend, I mean, not a close friend, but a friend. We see each other when I'm in the UK, who was a retired priest, and some local people here. There were many gay Christians, and I got to know them, and I just thought, these people are far better followers of Jesus than I am, and most of the people I know. And that was the crack. And then you go through it and you push, it gets wider and wider, because then you start to read more, read theology more, read other translations, speak to other people. And I met with a wonderful group of people. I reached out to someone, and they got together, a few gay Christian people, and there are many, and we met. I remember that we met in a basement. It was in a hotel in downtown Toronto, and it was exponential after that. I mean, that was the real issue. That was the real issue. In fact, I think in some ways, if the Roman Catholic Church, who am I, but said, you know what, that's okay, equal marriage, honors God, beautiful, based in justice and love, I wonder if I would have left any, because there were other issues that came in too, but that was the big one. And once I had to reconsider that one, I then considered other things too. And then when you question the authority of the Pope, and I realized that millions of Catholics don't really care what the Pope says, I understand that, but the teaching is papal authority, not infallibility, unless speaking on faith and morals, which is incredibly rare, but just the authority. And I mean, I still regard myself, I suppose, in a way as a Catholic, but within the Anglican communion. And the Anglican communion has many Catholics, Catholic, evangelical, whatever. But I couldn't be the Christian I thought I could be and wanted to be while still in that church. And it was that issue of equal marriage that really pushed me. And the forgiveness from the gay community and the love I've had over the years has been quite incredible. And that's what started my friendship with Stephen Fry, who was an atheist, of course. But he saw some of my material and he wrote to me, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a hoax. But we've become friends since then. And this man, who is a well-known atheist, has been very, very supportive of me as a Christian and a priest. In fact, last time I saw him, we had lunch in London, and I said, is it okay if I wear my clerical collar? He said, darling, I want you to wear a chasuble.
By the way, talking about your collar, I love a story. I love a story that you tell, which is that you went to watch a soccer game in a local pub.
That was in London.
Wearing, that was a great story. You want to tell that story?
I can't remember the details of it, but I mean, I wasn't conscious of it because I was just wearing it, and then you realize people are sort of looking, and I don't put them off their game. They can't. People swear at football, of course they do, and
that's right.
Yeah. Well, how people react when they see the collar is when you're first ordained, you're very self-conscious. Then after a while, you don't even know you're wearing it, and how people react, which is overwhelmingly positive. And one thing I I think I wrote it. I can't remember. But when I was first ordained, I went to England a couple of months later, and it happened twice outside a pub. I was waiting outside a pub for a friend, and these guys came out the pub, had a couple of drinks. They were sort of slightly rowdy, but not bad, just fun. And it was, oi, Father, you all right, mate? Buy your drink. Come on, Father, buy your drink. I said, no, it's okay. And it happened twice to him. And I said this actually to Richard Coles. And I said, this happened twice. He said, yeah. I said, what? He said, men of that age, you'd be surprised how many of them have either been in the army or been in prison. And the only compassion they really see in those two institutions is the chaplain, the padre. And they see you and they feel affection for you. So I thought that was lovely.
Yeah. Where did you intern, by the way? You talked about prisons, hospitals. Where did you intern?
Well, mostly churches. I did a lot of social work in this neighborhood, but the churches were, where did I go? There were several. St. Jude's in Oakville and Incarnation in Oakville, mainly Oakville churches. In fact, the priest who at St. Jude's, Rob Feed, he was a dear man, wonderful priest. And I was still at Trinity, I remember, and he died. He was on his motorbike and someone went through a stoplight and killed him. That was an incredible shock because he'd been very important to me. And I mean, his poor wife, it was terrible. Yeah.
You know, I was, prior to this interview, I braced myself because I remember you from many, many years ago from your show. And I say this with deep respect. You were very arrogant. In fact, you talk about Steve Paikin was showing you an interview from many years ago, and you had written a book about the surety of the Catholic Church and how that was the truth. Mm-hmm. And Steve asked you how you felt about it after showing it to you. And you said, well, I'm really taken back by it. I'm very uncomfortable with it. And I have arrogance too, by the way. Please, I'm not standing in judgment, because my real point is, after watching some of your most recent interviews, I see that your journey has really changed you. And I make a point of saying this because I know many people in my community who are what we would call Torah Jews. They ensconce themselves in study, and they even ensconce themselves in Musar, which is self-help within Judaism. And they're not nice guys. They're not nice guys. And people will say, that's very strange. They're so religious. They're so Jewish. Yet it doesn't seem like the Torah has had a huge effect on them in terms of their character, in terms of their generosity of spirit, in terms of their humility. And then when I was watching you, I relaxed before we came to the interview, because you have changed a lot. You're a very humble man.
Yeah, I'm really humble.
Yeah, well, listen, from my perspective, you're not the man you were that way.
You know, thank you for saying that. I think in some ways I was, to a degree, that man back then, but there was a persona, and I allowed, even encouraged, the worst parts of me to come to prominence. I mean, I know I could be, I don't want to go on about it, but I could be extremely kind. And the people who came on my show, what was interesting was those people I disagreed with witnessed how often they came back. In other words, they were treated well. I was scrupulous in not allowing personal attacks, but there's always a struggle, all of us. And will you allow one side to win, or will you fight against it? Will you realize that that is not admirable, what's happening there, and you've got to fight against that? And it's very interesting that what you say about those people, because for me, I know Christians, most Christians I know, work with at the churches I'm part of, they are just lovely people. I mean, you find out things about them. It even does that. I mean, just the goodness. But I've also met Christians over the years who, well, by their outward behavior, they're not good people. Well, how should I put it? I don't understand. I cannot see where they've been influenced by Christ. And there are a few people like,
Yes, yes.
and that really disappoints me. And I it's not that you're always good. God, I get things wrong. Of course I do. But you admit when you're wrong, and at least you should be trying to behave in a certain way. And there are people I know, or I used to know, certainly. Well, when I left the Catholic Church, there were some lovely people, but you wouldn't believe the abuse I got, the threats and the filth and attacking my family, and in the name of their religion. Well, it is a religion. I'm about a relationship with God. Call it a religion if you want, but if it's just that religiosity, that it's become another tribe, and that's very much contrary to what Jesus preached.
Generally, people who are kind, they don't want to speak about it. Now, that's a good thing, because that's a reflection of humility as far as I see it. The challenge to that, by the way, is that kindness is very quiet by definition. Evil is extraordinarily loud. So let's just take this moment, and I want to ask you about your kindness, okay? And you can position it any way you like. What is kindness inside of you? How does it work? What does it look like?
I don't really know how to answer that. I mean, I could be much kinder than I am, and I think it's owning up to your own privilege, your own advantages, and seeing the lack of those in other people, and also being honest about how kind or unkind you are. Kindness isn't passive. It's not just smiling. Sometimes it means getting involved, and you help people by really being there. You know, there are times when I'm tired, I really don't want to do another home visit. They're generally lovely. They always are. But do I want to do another one? There are times when you put others before yourself. Now, in doing that, maybe that's a selfish act. I don't know, because you do get a feeling of well-being from it. But no, I think saying, well, I would prefer to do this, but I'm not going to do it. It's how most of us, I think, are with our children. I would think. I know but we aren't with other people. And there's a reading. I preached the day that we're doing this interview. The reading was Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, and his third appearance after the resurrection. And he asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Which, of course, in the Greek uses different words for love, but not in the English. But he refers to them. I think there are 7 disciples and some other people. He refers to them as children.
Agape is an agape love, isn't it?
Yeah, it's philo and agape, and but you just can't translate it into the English. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Yes.
But he doesn't call them friends or brothers. He calls them children, and that's quite interesting, because he realizes how broken they are. They've gone from Jerusalem 80 miles to the Sea of Galilee. But what we see in our children, the way we're prepared, to do anything for them, and very difficult to do that for people you just met. But if you can at least aspire to that. But I would emphasize kindness. It's not just passivity. That's not what it is. And it's not weakness. It is seeing dignity in other people and trying to make their life better because of it.
In conclusion, I've years with my relationship with God. Well, what I will say succinctly at this point in time is that my son did very well in school this year. He's 19 years old. He goes to U of T, and I see that he's a natural academic, and it makes me very proud. You might know the Jewish word nachas. Mm-hmm. Nachas means Jewish pride. And I look up at the heaven, I say, thank you. Thank you so much. And I have such great gratitude. And of course, on the flip side, when things go badly, God forbid, I look up at the heavens, I go, what's going on? Like, what's this all about? That's kind of, in simple terms, the genesis of how things go with me and God. Can you explain your relationship with God? Do you have a dialogue?
Yeah, I do. And that's very important. I mean, faith is a dialogue, and prayer is a conversation. And it's it's very difficult to quantify and distinguish between what is just simple reflection and self-analysis and prayer. But in those times of solitude and quiet, and I'll go through the daily office, just listening. And there are people who will say, well, yeah, you're listening and you're just thinking of certain things. Nothing to do with God. Okay. But I believe it is God's intervention. When I'm asking, not asking for things, but asking that I would change in a certain way, I would feel I could. It is that relationship. It's all about relationship. And any Christian, I don't want to be too blanket on this, but I certainly believe every Christian should be able to say, I have a personal relationship with God. Because I think without that, I'm not sure if you can actually reach what it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ.
And Jesus, the word of Jesus is the word of truth, and the Bible is the interpretation of it. Is that correct? You've said that?
Well, I think that Jesus is the word of God, and the word made flesh. And scripture is incredibly important, but you've got to understand it through the prism, through the filter of Jesus' actions. And how did he act? What did he do? What did he say? And it's this beautiful candelabra of love, and you see something through it, and you read scripture through it. But otherwise, reading a text, you need more than that. You need a spirit of understanding and love in you.
Michael, I want to thank you very much for this. I quite enjoyed it, and I really appreciate your time. Thank
Pleasure.
you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you watching and listening as well, and I'd like to sort of give a bit of a synopsis at the end of the show, and I would say succinctly put, we are here on planet Earth for a very short time. As to whether we come back or not, well, that's what we call a machloket. We may or we may not. It's difficult to say. But while we're here, I think that we have to actualize ourselves as much as possible. And sometimes that means what? It means starting at a particular point in life, being a God-fearing, not being God-fearing, wherever you're at, and being open to other ideas and opening your mind to the potential out there, listening to the greats who have spoken about, the major things in life that we all think about. Why are we here? Well, what's the reason? What is our actual gift? How are we supposed to grow? What I like to take away, what I would ask you to take away from this interview is Michael spoke extensively about changes that he's gone through. And while within an hour interview, it sounds like, okay, great, well done, nice job. And it is. Fact of the matter is, we didn't talk about the pain and the suffering and the difficulties very much that goes along with change. But it does. But at the end of it, there is more often than not always, but more often than not, when it's a positive change, there's a beautiful light. And that light, some people will define as God, and some people would just define it as self-actualization. And I would suggest very strongly that you consider where you're at and what your ideas are and research them, dive right in, see if they make sense to you today as they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And if there's other ideas out there that make more sense to you today, then take a leap and try to figure out, open that crack, as we spoke about. As Leonard Cohen says, that's where the light shines in. Be courageous in this life. Be brave, because when you are, that's the beautiful stuff that comes out of it. So, Michael, thank you again. I'm really grateful, and I enjoyed it so much. I'm really happy to hook up again. It's been many years, and I wish you, they say in Yiddish, Yeshakoach, well done on your journey. Well done. All right, till we meet again, folks, Sei gesund, which is Yiddish. Go out there and be healthy, and I really appreciate you watching and listening.